Javed Ashraf, former ambassador of India to France, is joining us. Ambassador Ashraf, how do you look at this situation? India, of course, briefing US, UK, UAE. But what is it that India should be prepared for in terms of reaction from other countries?
Well, first of all, let me say that, it takes a great deal of political courage, political daring, and a sense of responsibility at the leadership level of the Prime Minister to undertake an operation of this magnitude. And also want to congratulate the Indian Armed Forces, particularly the Air Force, for the precision strikes. Remember, Bahawalpur and Muridke have been the crucible of terrorism for a very, very long time. Since at least the 1980s, we've been bringing them to the world's attention. Now, what happens from now onwards? One, we'll be having to be dominating the battle of the narratives. And this has got to be in the three important respects globally. One, that our attack was justified. Second, that it was measured with no collateral damage and that we took out terrorist camps. There were no civilian or military targets. And third, the outcomes were visible. I mean, because the last time during Balakot, there was, they managed to create a fog of confusion in Pakistan that nothing was achieved. So we have this narrative to present. That's one. The second, internationally, we have to be able to get the world to accept this as a legitimate right to defend on behalf of India. Now, remember, historically, since at least the 90s, what we have seen is that the world's attention shifts from terrorism to preventing the war between the two countries. And there are many countries that start equating the victim and the attacker, in the sense Pakistan and India. And we have to be sure that we do not get back into that trap. So this operation was planned to be swift, to achieve the political and the security objectives with minimal risk, minimum economic fallout, and in a manner that the escalation could be controlled. We also have to watch out for hybrid warfare, which is that cyber attacks, information warfare. All of that will go on simultaneously, besides what you see on the military field. So this is also a moment of great responsibility for us diplomatically, and that we have to not just at this point of time get the world to accept the action that we have taken, but also to, in a sense, ensure that Pakistan is treated as a sponsor of terrorism, because hitherto the world has differentiated in some way between terrorism emanating from Pakistan that affects them and terrorism that affects us. And we've got to be sure that we push it pretty strong. And so far, I think the world has, in a sense...
Ambassador Ashraf, let me ask you one question. I asked earlier before you joined the broadcast, I asked General Bikram Singh, former Chief of Army Staff, that does he think that a retaliation from Pakistan is imminent? Now, I add one more question to that, and I ask you that if Pakistan chooses to react, if Pakistan chooses to retaliate, in your view, what can possibly they target? We have targeted the heavens of terror. We have targeted the Mecca of terror, global terror. What can possibly they target?
You see, again, you have to, we have a war game that scenario as well. Now, if Pakistan retaliates, they'll have to retaliate in terms of our military installations, military establishments, etc. Now, that's an actual act of war. That's an escalation that takes us into a full-scale conventional war. In that event, of course, we have obviously a number of retaliatory options. There are, the possibilities. We have much higher level of superiority in terms of naval power. Also in terms of our air power, there, of course, ground forces are well positioned. I think it would be, perhaps it's hard to, wars are always a series of escalation of unanticipated developments. But I would say that Pakistan would have a limited objective of inflicting a limited damage, trying to win the battle of narratives, play the victim, and satisfy its domestic audience that it stood up to a much larger adversary and that had tried to bully it. I mean, that would serve its objective as long as it feels that India would not then go on to the second order and a third order steps after what we have done in terms of the taking out the 9 terrorist camps. So they will also be calculating how much staying power they have. And getting into retaliating against military targets in India would invite a massive retaliation and a legitimate one from India too.
Yes, that's the concern. That's the concern, because if Pakistan chooses to escalate it and targets military bases or military targets, then possibly it will evoke a second or a third reaction.
Yeah, so you have to see that it's all a game of probabilities as well. I mean, sitting in Delhi, our planners will also be trying to get as much human intelligence and technical intelligence into what is the actual Pakistani calculations and thinking beyond their public rhetoric. And we will also be taking into account what their readiness and preparedness is. What is their staying capacity for a long duration war? What is the state of their economy? What is the level of supplies they have? And there are different modes through which you put pressure. So I think that once we attack Pakistan and we take out these 9 camps, we have also taken into account the risks that escalation and our capacity to contain it, manage it, and dominate that escalation. And that is something that we would have taken into account, because if they do target, and we've been very particular in pointing out that we've not targeted civilian or military installations. And therefore, if they do retaliate militarily in terms of military assets or military installations, then I think we would be prepared for a pretty strong response. And remember that there is an economic asymmetry, a capability asymmetry. And I don't think we will fall into the trap of the nuclear rhetoric, which they keep sometimes bandying about.
Yes, Ambassador Ashraf, India has managed to communicate to the world that this was an unprovoked aggression, an act of terror which happened on 22nd. And that's the reason why there has been support which has come from just about every nation which has been affected by terrorism in one way or the other. Now that we are looking at it, do you see that India, and if you look at the mix, or should I say the composition of the press conference, it was the Foreign Secretary and 2 Indian officers who addressed the press conference. So India is repeatedly communicating to the world. First, it did after 22nd when the terror attack happened, and now after having carried out these strikes against terror camps, that there is a need for constant engagement with all these nations, not just the allies as we look at them, but also envoys of multiple nations as we did on 23rd.
So, our diplomatic initiative is going to be intense and very comprehensive. One, we will reach out to all the countries in the world. It isn't just about the United States or our European allies or, Japan or Korea, or the countries in the Gulf, our partners in Africa. We will be reaching out to everyone to convey the correct picture. And it's important we do that, because we've done that at every time we have been hit by terrorism on this scale from Pakistan, and that we have retaliated. It's very important. One is that bilaterally we engage all the countries with evidence and with evidence of what we've done. That's number one. The number two is what we are already doing in the UN Security Council and the UN framework. And remember, despite being a non-permanent member at this stage, Pakistan was not able. At first, it asked for a closed-door meeting. It obviously didn't want to be castigated in public. And therefore, it asked for a closed-door meeting, knowing what it would going to face from other members, permanent and non-member. That's the second part. And the third is that we will now go back to putting them on FATF, and also taking a number of other steps, including at the IMF, at the World Bank, at the Asian Development Bank, because it is very important for us to be able to convey to the countries that their assistance to Pakistan eventually ends up helping the military continue with its unremitting hostility towards India, practiced through this unconventional, asymmetric, politico-military instrument of terrorism. So it'll be a very comprehensive engagement. But remember, we should not I mean, we have to keep this as an ongoing process, not something that subsides after our rage and revenge period is, in a sense, over. Because despite taking out these camps, we can't be sure that new ones will not crop up or they will not find new recruits to the cause. So this is something that we'll have to continue pressing and to ensure that, as Dr. Jaishankar, our External Affairs Minister, said, and that Prime Minister has said repeatedly, that the world must have a zero tolerance towards terrorism, and there cannot be good terrorism or bad terrorism. That terrorism that affects the West is of a different level than terrorism that affects us. So the kind of sanctions that we have seen on some of the state sponsors of terrorism need in a large measure to also apply to Pakistan as well. And this is something that is going to be an ongoing diplomatic effort. We're not against saying we are targeting the people of Pakistan, but we want to be sure that those who run Pakistan literally, whether they sit in power or whether they are wearing the uniform, at some stage stop this unremitting effort at terrorism against India.
Yes.
Very, very important point Ambassador Ashraf makes there, that this process has to be continuous and engagement with the entire world, the global community of nations has to be continuous. And I think that is one thing that
I would say that, I wanted to point this out also, that we need to focus on this perennial challenge that has been with us for decades, as much as we now focus on some of the great geopolitical shifts and the opportunities that the global shifts are creating for us, because this is at the fundamental level important for India's security.
All right, Ambassador Ashraf, thank you for joining us.